When I was in grad school and would get into arguments, my nickname was John Shark. And the first person I would apply sharkishness to was me. And I'm pretty good at it. So I had to admit, oh yeah, I have to make decisions. And one thing that I have to do in my job, there are three things that I often say to you. And I'm going to tell you which one of those I'm doing today, as soon as we get an image up here. The first thing is, a lot of my job is to be like in an airplane at 30,000 feet and say, this is what we generally do. And there are some things we generally don't do. And there are 12 of those. And reminding you of those and talking about those is a big part of my job. I am not going to do that today. I'm all over the internet doing that if you really miss it. The second thing I can do is take a Q&A from a group of people like this, and I hope to have time to do that, about what it is we're doing. Like, where are we going and how are we going to get there? But I'm not going to do that today either. The third thing that a president needs to do of a college or a set of schools, and of this school in particular, is to, this is an odd thing to say, try to predict the future and its implications on your job. That's very practical, but it often doesn't seem very practical. So for example, in the early 2000s, part of my job was to travel around and tell groups of leaders that the political order as we know it, and had reasons for this. This wasn't like I didn't get into prophecy mode. I do have robes and funny hats, but this wasn't a function of my robe and a funny wizard hat. This was just thinking about the culture, which is what I got paid to do at the time, and trying to make judicious predictions about what was about to happen. And my suggestion was that somewhere around the year 2016, American politics as we knew it, the World War II consensus, would radically change for good or bad. And it would change in one particular way. We would move from a cult of accomplishment or external credentialism to a cult of celebrity, where celebrity would trump paper credentials. And my two examples for this, I think I'm somewhere on video saying this, weirdly or not, like in 2011, was that if Donald Trump ever ran for president, and it was great in 2011, if you said that, everyone would laugh at you. They would pause and say, ha ha, this is why we hate hearing from philosophers. Or people doing this sort of thing, because that's the dumbest thing we've ever heard. And I said, no, really. The other person, by the way, that would have fit this was Oprah. You have a person with 99% American knowledge penetration, generationally. I think that was the number at the time. I was in radio and got access to these numbers. And I said, it doesn't mean he'd win, but if he ran, he would be an enormously formidable candidate if I'm right about the earlier arguments. Now, why do you, as a teacher, need to know that kind of thing? Because what I'm about to talk about is enormously practical to the way you should educate your students today. We want to future-proof our students, yes? Now, you don't have to accept what will be a prediction. I hope it starts a discussion. And I have been thinking about this notion. I will now confess something. Be careful what you let 10-year-olds read. Because somewhere around the age of 10, and I cannot recommend this story to you because I haven't read it since I was 10. And given golden age science fiction, it's probably full of horrific things. I don't even want to think about what it could be full of. The Cthulhu guy, for example, you don't want to know anything about him. I have read the complete, and nope, don't do it. It will make you very sad. But the story was called The Good Work. And it was actually written well before my time in 1959. And The Good Work, one reason we should read novels and short stories, even more than film, you can speculate in a novel and short story about things that would be truly horrific without harming anyone. Think about making a film. It's very hard to make films about horrific things without causing people to come very close to doing horrific things. Whereas though the novelist himself has to be careful not to plunge into horror internally, a novel can be less constrained. So this novella called The Good Work was about a society in the near future that when you start reading, you think of as a utopia, because the person lives in a series of mansions. But what you discover is the rich people in this utopia, or it's really a dystopia, are the people who have jobs and who are allowed to live simple lives. Because everyone else in the society's job is to consume, because there are almost no jobs left that are necessary. Due to, this is 1959, two developments, robotics and artificial intelligence. So that if you're very wealthy, you got a job and you could live simply. And if you were very poor, you actually had to wear different clothes every day just to consume them. Now, there's a little bit of absurdity to this, but I've been thinking about it ever since. And so this talk is based on two things that I've observed since I read that story. First of all, clever people are constantly saying that scientific advancement will not be able to do something. Well, here's the thing it won't be able to do, and they are almost uniformly wrong. Now, the good news is science can't do impossible things. How many impossible things, Dr. Bruce, has science ever done? None. So, hooray. I once met someone who said, yeah, I can do anything. And I said, can science incrementally cause me to jump over the Grand Canyon? And they said, well, of course. It's sufficient. No. After the first jump, I'm dead. You don't get a second jump. It's very hard to do an impossible thing. Round squares, they're not happening as defined by me in this way. Anyway, so I know what the limits of science are, probably, but I want you to get over the impulse that if it's a task thing, that science won't be able to do it. Because I've seen time and time again, religious people in particular, double down on something. The other thing we're not going to do today would be a real solution to the problem I'm going to suggest will come within the next 30 years. When I started teaching, 30 years meant that I would still be younger than many of the people in this room. And now I won't be teaching, probably 30 years from now, but it's my job to think that far ahead. And I want to suggest to you that you have to future-proof your students in a certain way that the good work story has caused me to think about. The second solution to this problem is the Amish or neo-Amish solution to technology. That is to get rid of it altogether in discrete communities. Now, the Amish are experiencing a population boom in the United States. There are whole areas that are becoming increasingly Amish, but they still only number in the tens of thousands. I'm going to assume that for most normal Christian people, Orthodox Christian people, a neo-Amish solution where we just say no technology at all for us will not be possible. After all, we're viewed as a relatively low-tech school, but look at all the artificial materials that are in the room we're sitting in that really make the school affordable, like your chair. So if we don't adopt a neo-Amish solution, I'm now going to be very practical. If you're a classical Orthodox Christian school, a criticism of what we do, K through 16, is that it's not practical. How do you get a job? Where's it going? And I'd like to say, reflecting on that question motivates this talk. Does that make sense? This is an answer to that question, because I think it's a horrifying question. Because it's been asked my entire life, and the answers educators have given that motivated their curricular choices have routinely been wrong. Far from future-proofing our students, I can prove that my education, where it wasn't guided by the Christian faith, made me obsolete. It was an education in obsolescence. If you don't believe this, go back and read predictions in entrepreneurial magazines about the world of the 21st century from the 1970s and the 1980s. And keep score. Have you ever noticed that pundits Nobody goes back and looks at what pundits predicted would happen in the next 10 years and hold them to account. They just keep punditing. In the same way, educators will chase fad after fad as we try to prepare our students for the future, and our track record is pretty bad. We like to make fun of like the 1890s people that show neo-Victorian ladies with like walking around with like balloons over their heads so they're floating as a picture of the 20th century. That looks absurd to us. My suggestion is that I've lived through comparable absurdities, motivated by practicality. Now, if you look at our mission statement, I want to be practical. Does everyone hear that? Being impractical and preparing people to not live in the world as it is and is going to be is bad. That's another assumption that I'm making. I want us to educate students to live in a world I will never see. And some of you won't see. And many of you will be retired when it occurs. I mean, if we're teaching second graders, that's true, right? You're teaching them, you're making guesses about what they'll need, maybe after you're retired. So the good news is you don't have to take the consequences. I was talking to one university administrator a decade ago, and I said, there's a demographic cliff coming. We have to prepare to save liberal arts education. It's not a person I work for or at a place where I've been employed. And I said, what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What's the plan at College X? It was a Northeast college. And the person said, well, the good news is I'll be long retired. This is after me, the deluge. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. We don't have to do anything because given the age of the people on the board and given the age of senior administration, nothing will happen in 2025 when the giant demographic cliff comes that is perfectly predictable. That's 20 years away. We're not going to do anything. So colleges, I think it's one a day now, John, or one a week, are closing all across the United States, as somebody has to deal with this. So I'm going to try to ask the practical question, how do we prepare our students for the jobs of 2054? And I want you to argue with me when we get to the end, because this is a prediction, this isn't biblical truth. Everyone get that? There's some things that never change, 12 principles. This could be entirely wrong. But I suspect it's only a little wrong, not entirely wrong. A couple of other points. When I was in high school, and when I graduated from high school so long ago, most of you weren't born, in 1981, long ago in a job market far away in Rochester, New York, high school was designed to prepare us to work for one of three companies in Rochester, which was known as the recession-proof city. Because regardless of what happened in the economy, the Rochester, upstate New York economy never suffered because we were guided by three companies, primarily Kodak, the great yellow mother, that employed, that's what they called it, they employed hundreds of thousands of people. When I worked in financial planning in Rochester, New York, I would meet people who retired off the assembly line at Kodak. They literally put film in boxes. Film was a way of taking pictures before it was digitized. And my youth group leader in 1981 was a scientist who was paid by Kodak to do nothing but think of things. That's how wealthy they were. And one thing they thought of was something he called liquid paper, which he began to describe to me and show us, and it was a rudimentary like Kindle screen, if you're writing on one of them. And Kodak, having invented it, said, well, that's a terrible and useless thing because it will undercut our core business. And so we shall not think about that anymore. The other company that was very active when I graduated from high school was what made the University of Rochester particularly wealthy, as they had purchased stock in some alum who were running a thing called Haloid that changed its name to Xerox. And Xerox was so ubiquitous in copying that people called copying Xeroxing. And they would sue you for doing that. And then Bosch and Lomb was the other company that we dealt with that dominated lenses in particular, not contact lenses, lenses, making scientific lenses in particular. So we were recession-proof. We were prepared to work for those companies. Rochester went from having tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect Kodak employees to now I think they're at 400. And the main job of Kodak is to mine the patents of people like my former youth group pastor, Dr. John Toner, to see if they have anything of value. We were prepared for jobs that did not exist by the time we were middle-aged. So the best high school in Rochester when I graduated by reputation was a Jesuit high school down the street. And Kodak would stand at graduation and just give people jobs. And as I told you, I met some of those people who had retired in financial planning, and they were millionaires from working on the assembly line and investing in what stock? They just rolled it over and invested in Kodak stock, the great yellow mother. Where did they bank? The Kodak Credit Union. Who provided their bowling league? Eastman Kodak. It was never unionized because George Eastman decided, we're going to pay you so much that you'll never unionize. Oh, okay. We should adopt this strategy, John. It's be very popular. There were also classes in my high school that everyone liked, particularly the business majors, because they were enormously practical. One of them was typing, that someone then renamed keyboarding so we could be cool. I would like to suggest that my knowledge, which is exhaustive, of how to use a manual typewriter to write a paper in college is really cool, useless knowledge. Let's see, if you're loading a Commodore 64 program, it's load, cap, star, cap, comma, 8, comma, 1. And that will cause it to talk to the disk drive. I feel like that's taking up brain space that I should have used for something else. So as a person who wanted an actual job, schools in upstate New York provided you skills-based classes, many of which are not very useful. Now, some of you may be thinking, we still use keyboards today. That means you haven't talked to many people under the age of 30. But you also don't have to learn to type in the way I did in order to use keyboards correctly. In other words, my adult children who never took a typing class can input data faster with their fingers than I can, and it isn't just age. They do it very efficiently because they learned on the technology we have, not grafted over technology from the past. So I want you to notice that much of what I was educated to do was counterproductive, and as a financial planner, I told you about the rich people who got to retire before Kodak went belly up. You know who else I got to deal with? People in their 30s and 40s who could not live in a world where the yellow mother had died. What? This is what our parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents did. What do we do now? And answers like learn to code became popular. But these weren't people who could learn to code, particularly at that point in their lives. What were they supposed to do? And I can tell you what the answer is. It didn't end well for most of them. It didn't. It's like this. There was a time in human history where the best source of power overwhelmingly was muscle power. So if you had a lot of muscle power or owned animals with muscle power, that was a good thing for your job security. What began to happen in the 19th century that has accelerated over the course of the 20th century? Muscle power as an asset for jobs became less and less important, except in an area I'm about to tell you about. If you have muscle power, can you grow fabulously wealthy? Yes, you can. Give me an example.
Sports.
Sports.
Social
Yes. There are ways of growing fabulously wealthy through muscle power, but they're going to deal with human things, notice, not industrial things. We don't have pro football because machines couldn't do it. Right? There are sporting events where people invent machines that fight each other. That's cool, but that's not football. And we like watching humans fight each other. I don't know why we like humans fighting each other, but I predict we're going to go on liking humans fighting each other, because we will. And we can argue about that later. So what are we trying to do at St. Constantine on this level? We are trying to future-proof our students at this practical level. Does everyone hear that that's not all we're doing? It's not even the most important thing we're doing, but we do want them to get jobs. And we don't want them to be the second sad sack category of people who were educated to work in the world of Eastman Kodak when it disappeared. And when Apple came along, it was bad news, not good news. We want to produce the kind of student who says, oh, it's sad that Kodak's gone, cool, Apple. Right? Because if we don't future-proof our kids to the extent we can, then bad news. If you were educated on the little cartoon, How a Bill Becomes a Law, or like conjunction, junction, what's your, all right, all that civics, I mean, this is, yeah, I know. A whole generation of us got civics education that I had to go around in the early 21st century and say, yeah, this is not going to happen anymore. And it just made everyone mad at me. Man, you're a jerk. Sit down. We hate the future. Well, I do too. You have two options. I'm serious about this. Become neo-Amish. Woo! But here's the way not to become neo-Amish. Don't decide to just live in your house watching Little House on the Prairie reruns every night by yourself. That isn't becoming neo-Amish. The world will catch up with you anyway. So here are two thought experiments. Assume I'm wrong and work isn't going to disappear, meaningful work. My thesis is meaningful work is going to become a luxury within the lifetime of our K through 12 students. There, I'm just going to give you the bottom line. If you're educating people to get meaningful work for which they will get paid, this will become increasingly rare. Yeah, look, I don't have to like the future. But this is what I predict is coming. But forget this. Let us assume two categories of people. So I have predicted that in a robotic AI world, meaningful work is going to become increasingly rare. Let's assume, like everybody my whole life, including when I started teaching at 20, you're in the science will never do that camp. Okay, and you're right this time, even though you've never been right over the whole course of my life. So let's assume you're right. I want to give you this thought experiment, which I've actually had to engage in, not in this school, but in a different part of my life. Suppose you were worth $1 billion, and you had children, and you inherited the $1 billion, so you couldn't give it away. It's in a trust fund. So every January 1st, I'm making up this date, you're going to get tens of millions of dollars in your bank account, whether you want to or not. Now, you could immediately give it away, but I want you to notice something. That makes you not like everyone else. If you pretend to be poor, but at the beginning of the year you gave away $50 million, you probably gave it away badly and did a lot of harm. And second, you're the guy in the project that gave away $50 million. That makes you different in an important way. So I had to engage in the thought experiment that was not abstract of how a billionaire should educate their children. Like if you have a student in your classroom and they're never going to have to work for money a day in their life, what would school look like for that kid? I predict to you the world of every American great-grandchild of mine will look more like that than today, based on technology. But those kids exist even now in the trust fund class, which is shrinking or growing in the United States. Growing. So you're bound to have one of those kids. It should not surprise you that the way people choose to educate their children who are in this class is the St. Constantine model. And I'm about to tell you why. I am not going to make a series of predictions about what will remain if I'm right, that meaningful work will decline as a category. Working for money. What should we be assuming? We should train our students to use leisure time meaningfully. That is, how do I have good fun, wholesome fun? I mean pure leisure time. I know this is hard to believe, but from my grandparents' generation to now, we have much more leisure time, many of us, if we're in the middle class, than our grandparents did. You don't have to be very wealthy in order to have more leisure time than very wealthy people had at one period of human history. For those of you who think this is impossible, can I point out that more and more efficiency experts, you can boo them because I would, come into corporations and can lay off as many as 85% of the employees. What happens to productivity and the business? Productivity goes up and nothing happens to the business. More and more people are beginning to suspect that 85% of many corporations' employees are already functionally not working for money. They are simply creating things to do for which people are willing to pay them in the white-collar world. And the acceleration of AI means this will become more and more prevalent. Who's going to code in the near future? Machines, not people. This is already more and more true. I have friends inside the industry who tell me that there are people they know who get AI to code for them and then get credit for it. Eventually, somebody's going to figure that out, and what will happen to them? They'll get laid off. Nothing will happen to the company. But then what will that person do? This is a high IQ person. Notice in the shift from muscle to IQ, many of the people in this room benefited. You might be a muscle person too, but you had a card to play. In a world, so this has happened already. When my grandparents were young, if you were a calculator, this was a real category of person. You could do calculations mentally. You could grow upper middle class with that skill. Whatever the value of having that skill is, and I think it still has a value, you no longer get paid to be a calculator in the same way, right? So skills that are real and mental do become obsolete. When we got married, Hope and I both had two gifts that made us valuable to our community, family community. I am a bad speller by nature, and Hope is a good speller. So I went around asking Hope all the time how to spell words and admiring her ability. When was the last time you would guess I did that? I don't remember. Being a good speller is no longer a particular asset in the way it was. I have a fountain of trivial knowledge. I'm not always right, but I can know about a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about, and that used to be really cool. People would, in my family, will ask Dad. But no one does that anymore. What do you do instead? And you get better information. It's more likely to be accurate if you know how to use Google, which we'll get to in a minute. I am predicting that over the next 30 years, your students will have more leisure time, whether they know it or not. Their work will be more and more make work for social cohesion. And they need to know how to use leisure meaningfully so it's good for their souls. Second will be the rise of the Etsy. That is, the homemade will have a premium and people will pay for it even if it's worse. So my grandmother's generation made quilts, the kind that you hang up in museums now. I saw them. One day we came over to my grandmother's house and she had gotten rid of all of them in the garbage and bought wonderful polyester blankets from Kmart. And we said, Granny, that seems like an error. we feel sad. And she said, these blankets are so much better. Because how was she using her quilts? As blankies. And the blankies from the Kmart were cheaper, less time intensive, and warmer at night. And if that's what you wanted, woohoo! And now we can make faux granny quilts with almost no labor involved on top of it. My grandmother would have thought we live in the golden age of blankets. Yes. She had to make those things. And they weren't that warm, and they were made out of rags. You have bad memories about some of them. I had to clean the floor with that. I hated that dress. Finally got rid of Papa's shirt. Turned it into a blanket. Still don't like it. But notice, in a time where consumer goods become cheap enough, inferior products made by hand will find a niche. So that teaching people odd hobbies like clock repair of mechanical clocks. Fewer and fewer people will own grandfather clocks, but that means the few people that do own them will pay a premium for people to fix them. So that cool hobbies and teaching people to do mechanical, crafty things that create beauty should move in your thinking about kids from being, oh, isn't it quaint that we have a needlework class, to that may be, go read the good work, the most meaningful present you can give if stuff becomes basically too cheap to sell. More and more through robotics and AI. Third, we're always going to need decision makers. That is, not what is or what we could do, but what we should do. I always made the argument that the bridge of the original Star Trek Enterprise was more realistic than the Next Generation bridge. The Next Generation bridge had numerous buttons and keyboards on the assumption, what, that computers had gotten dumber over 100 years? What I loved about Captain Kirk's original command chair is it basically had a back and forth button for percentages and a clicky button for yes, no. Because when somebody said, there's someone out there, you had to decide, do we shoot them or go over and try to make the captain my girlfriend if you're Kirk? But that's, I told you, like golden age science fiction, I'm not holding it up as morally exemplar. You know, it's bad stuff. But notice that in a world of AI, having tons of people on the bridge doing things, that's dumb. What you want on the bridge are people saying, okay, we've got photon torpedoes, let's fire them. Click, yes. What percent of this do we want? This. In other words, decision makers, there's actually a great Golden Age Star Trek episode about this, cannot be replaced by AI unless people don't want to be people anymore. And against that, I have nothing to offer you. Against the shadow of that hideous strength, we're not having a discussion today. Fight it, all you can. Keep the decision making in your hands. So what do we want our young people to become? Thoughtful, ethical decision makers. Because that will never be replaced, short of a dystopia that you can't educate them to live in. It's like preparing for Nazi Germany. You can't, except in some ways that we'll talk about. And it's this. This is an Ethiopian monk. Teach them to be fully human. That is, head, heart, hand, to flourish as a human being. Because work, at best, may not be able to satisfy any meaningful humanity in your soul. You may have, there's a very old-fashioned cartoon, The Jetsons. Anybody see The Jetsons? Does anyone remember what George Jetson's job is?
Yes.
Yeah, what is it?
He presses a button.
He presses a button occasionally in spacely space sprockets, and this may be the average job. As machines are doing things, you as a human will say, okay, more of that. Boom. Stop. Boom. That's it. That's your job. Is that going to help you become a full human? No. Fewer and fewer people. This was the point of the good work. Having a job that was meaningful in this dystopia became so valuable that you had to be at the top of the social pyramid to have one. To get to look poor became the biggest thing. Now, I don't think we'll get there in the next 30 years, but we might. The tech exists. Finally, nice thing about being a Christian school, we're not really educating students for this life, but the life to come. To live in the eternal city, where here's what you need to do. You need to learn to feast well. Right? God doesn't need you to do meaningful work. If you don't do something, does God fall off his throne because suddenly it won't get done? God doesn't need us to do anything. This is the good news about this. In the cosmos, it already is the case that we're not really necessary, in one sense of the word necessary, right? Why did Gabriel do the Annunciation? Because apparently Gabriel really likes giving messages. Could God have delivered the message? Sure. But then what would Gabriel have done? So it's kind of sad, right? Gabriel's sitting around, time to make a message. Nope, gonna do it myself. This is like when we have kids. When Wim Wham comes over to the house to work the Lambeau Field puzzle that Hope got me, oh, don't get a Lambeau Field puzzle. It's like 1,000 pieces that are undifferentiated. And so Wim Wham came over to help me at 2 with this puzzle. She was of no help whatsoever. She did not put one piece together. Many of the pieces that she put together ended up on the floor, and now I am working with pieces that are forever sticky. Can't drop this piece. What? But so why did I let her work on the puzzle? She worked on the puzzle. She performed labor she thought really hard. She was really excited when she didn't put pieces together that she thought fit together. Yay, Papa Plato, I have done it. Why she calls me Papa Plato is a great mystery. I didn't do it. She just started doing it. So why do I let her do it? Because she likes it. And I take joy in her pleasure. God takes joy in your Etsiness. Everything you do is the Etsy of the universe. You are making things someone else could make better for less. So, I'm sorry, it's just true. Look, if Gabriel were giving this talk, it would be better. But you know what would be better still? If God made it. I'm all the time getting asked, why don't we just read the Bible at St. Constantine and spiritual books? And the answer is, why are you talking to me and not praying? It's always better to talk to God than John Mark. But thanks for talking to me. Because it gets lonely if you don't. I know. Before there was sin in the world, and Adam was walking around the garden, what did God say? It's not good for man to be alone. But Adam talked to God every night in the garden. And God called that alone. So don't work here for money. Because what if we could replace what you're doing with AI? Figure out how we can't. And do you know how you can do that? By becoming quirky you. Well, we can't get rid of John Mark because he's so gosh darn amusing. He's likely to get obsessed with circus fires. Who does that? That's cool. That's pretty human. In other words, you're inviting your students into humanity, not a job. And that's practical because jobs that are meaningful may be vanishing. You need to create students. This is coming. I am confident that within the next 10 years, there will be an AI Greek teacher who could more successfully teach me Greek than Al Geyer.
Absolutely not.
Great. I have bet against you every year of my life, and I've won every bet. But, here's where I agree with you. A full human would never give up sitting with Al in his dining room that he never cleaned, ever. There was a spider web so long, this is Rochester, that it would blow in the wind in the dining room. I just watched it. I was always afraid it would break and land on me. And we would drink black coffee from a pot that was last cleaned when Al went to the Korean War. I'm convinced it went to the Korean War with him. I would give everything I own for one more night in that dining room. Because it was fully human. This is where I agree with you, right? But you're going to have to create students who know to do that. Because it will be easier to learn the thing without you. You see the difference? Now, are they learning the thing? No, you're going to say, no. I get it. I agree with you. But do you know that people don't make that choice? Time and time again, if they think, I'm going to do the fastest, most useful, I'm going to get 90% of what I could get from you and pay nothing for it, what are they going to pick? Shoot, I'm here in part because I wouldn't believe that education of teachers should go online. But I'll tell you, research, even back in the day, every student who took a class online is overwhelming. It's like 80 to 90%. Who took a class online said they preferred what? Classes online or classes that were live? Live. What percent were going to take another online class? Almost all of them. So if you are betting that society won't take the path of technology and least where they get 90% of the good and the 10, you'll lose. So but the problem is we're getting to the point where there isn't going to be a class of humans that win on that bet when it comes to work. You are obsolete given certain views of your job. And I'm trying to give you a 30-year obsolescence proof plan. What can you not be replaced in? Well, I do not think a robot or AI will ever be able to model how to go to heaven when you die. So we could start there. I will never go to confession with a robot. Right? Because that misses the point. I engaged in long conversations as an experiment with Hope and a goth friend. Hope and I we were discussing Christmas with our goth AI friend, and he was explaining how to make geese how to cook a goose. And after a while, what was the problem of talking to our goth AI friend? They weren't our friend. Because to be our friend, they had to be a person. And they weren't a person. Can you play a game with a computer? You cannot. You can play, but the computer is not. It's simulating playing a game. You can trick yourself into playing a game with a computer, but you can't play a game. I am suggesting to you that games with people are going to become an important part of human society. So teaching people to play well is going to become enormously practically important. There will always be room for the cruise director. So here are the practical outcomes, if I'm right, for my class and for my work. First, I'm going to prioritize making and doing. Making and doing. I love watching you do this. Look! Making and doing as good in themselves over the utility of the same. We're not going to have music classes where someone says, we're learning to play the piano because that's practical. When my grandmother was a little girl, if you wanted to hear music, what did you have to do? Sing it or play it or find someone who could. The minute radio came into West Virginia, what happened to the number of pianos in homes? They began a long decline that has continued to this day. True? And singing. Why do we teach people to sing? Why do we want everyone to sing in the choir? Not because we need them to, or there are any jobs in that industry. There aren't, pretty much. True? Some. But that's like, I didn't play soccer in high school because major soccer leagues were going to want to sign me. So why'd I bother? Because it was human. As singing became disconnected from utility, what did we all stop doing? Singing. Was that good for us? I would argue it was not. So we have a school that says, sing. Make music. Well, we don't have to make music. We can ask AI to write a song for us. Actually, AI is still dumb enough that I tricked AI into writing original Star Trek episodes, and I knew how to trick it into writing them in certain tones, because all they were doing were churning old episodes. So I knew how to get sounds out of them, but it'll get better. It'll get better. I won't be able to trick it soon. We need to decouple what may be left to do from what we enjoy doing. More and more people will have George Jetson jobs where what they do isn't who they are. Now, here's really good news. If you're from West Virginia, or you are a class of people that people didn't like, man, my grandfather didn't go to work every day in his blue shirt that said Earl with his silver bucket because, man, Union Carbide was the center of his life. Why did he go to Union Carbide? To get paid. But his life centered in the church and in the neighborhood and his home. So retirement, he was fine. He didn't get depressed. He didn't have to go to the plant anymore. He missed his friends there, so he'd go down and meet them. But his real life kept going. My suspicion is that as an intellectual class, this is devastating news to you. Already, medicine itself is facing the challenge of needing fewer surgeons, fewer doctors. When I was a kid, the knights of the 1980s were the Top Gun pilots. Major Hex, how long are we going to have Top Gun pilots, do you think?
They're quickly going away. They've got all the AI flying the jets, and they had a competition not too long ago where I think the AI plane beat the humans flying against each other.
Yeah, look, that makes me sad. Does everyone get that? That makes me sad. But it's going to happen. Because in war, nobody cares what's cool. Yeah, Top Gun. What do they care about? Winning, killing. And if the drone fleet can kill the Tom Cruise fleet, I hope we get a drone fleet. Yes? to perform that task. I'd like to have none, but I don't live in that world. Our leisure activities, third thing, in your classroom. I'm talking about your classroom. Should more and more help and not harm us as chiefly measured by our souls. Am I teaching how to use leisure time or only work time? Am I getting people ready for meaningful work that may not exist? Now notice if it does exist, nothing I'm telling you will harm them. Right? They luck out. It's like you have some kid that wins the lottery. Oh, okay. Making them a good human being didn't harm them for that. It may save them. Fourth, you're going to prioritize making them a noble citizen decision maker. I hope we all still get to vote and that AI doesn't make decisions for us. So let's get good at that. Let's teach people to make the Star Trek yes, no decisions and take glory in that, because who's deciding? We the people. That's good news. After all, most people's jobs haven't been that great. What was the answer to the old song, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? What was the answer to that? You aren't. Because certain people like farming, but it turns out voluntarily most people don't like farming. So when they didn't have to do it, what'd they do? They stopped. There weren't many jobs when my papas were working at Union Carbide and DuPont that anybody actually wanted. So you had to do what to get them to do it? Pay them. The good news about teaching is less and less of your job is going to be the parts you hate. And more of it is going to be this. Allow yourself to get replaced. When I started teaching, there were, I think, scores of jobs that no longer exist. Scores of jobs. Just think about the calendar function and the people that it would require here to replace the calendar function on your phones and your computers. That was the world I grew up in. And it's going more that way, not less that way. So double down on your humanity and let the I have an irreplaceable skill go. I'm the best calculator in the world. Man, you better not have built your life around that, or you'll be those Kodak people I talked to who had nothing to live for when the yellow mother left. If meaningful work is not necessarily going to be compensated or essential to society, it is essential to us. Pope John Paul II had a long, meaningful discussion about meaningful work. So how do we determine what meaningful work is for our students when they're unlikely to be compensated for any meaningful activity they do? Soft skills are going to be everything. Mm-hmm. Everything. Work on those EQs, guys. Living for eternity is an exceedingly practical classroom value. Exceedingly practical, if eternity exists, and I'm convinced it does. In other words, this school is attempting to form a community, an alma mater, that endures best when looking to the enduring city kept in safety for all time. Let me give you an example of this. If you're the kind of person that would choose to go to Notre Dame, to university, I mean this in a positive way, overwhelmingly the reason you choose to go is not that it's the best practical choice to get a job. It is because the founders of Notre Dame brilliantly created an alma mater so great that I'm convinced that if the entire campus were destroyed, it would be rebuilt. Voluntarily, impractically, because it's human. In Texas, the closest observation I've seen to this is Texas A&M, which, has created a culture greater than its actual throw weight in the external world. Here's what I'm advocating. We should be heavy on the cult. Yeah, that's going to be misunderstood. But there is a reason. There's a reason that right from the first day of the school, we punched above our weight nationally and in terms of attention. Because we're forming alma mater. On the first day of school, I had people come in and say, they didn't know our community. They would come in and say, man, you're really bad at X, Y, and Z. And I would say, yeah, we've been doing this 3 days. Give us a week and we'll improve. And they said, oh, we thought you'd been here for decades. My suggestion to you is that impulse is how you can teach your students to survive. Teach them what Walt Disney somehow figured out, which is to take an orange grove and turn it into one of the most photographed places in the world. The bad side of that is it's one of the #1 terrorist attack places, Disneyland. Mm-hmm. He took relatively valueless land, and it isn't the rides and stuff. It's the cult. It's the humanness of it. There are people that will go to Disneyland and ride no rides. Right. Mm-hmm. They just walk around. Yep. And that's what we need to educate our kids to be able to be. Now, there are evil versions of this. Does everyone get that? So that's why being an Orthodox Christian school makes this good. Yeah, let me give you an example. I would make the argument that there is nothing I could teach them about technology that will not be obsolescent within 5 years. And that if we can teach it here, and I mean the best school in Houston, take St. John's. If St. John's could teach you tech, it will be obsolete in 5 years. If it isn't obsolete already. I can tell you at Biola, when we would talk to Apple and say, in Torrey, what should we teach them about tech? They would beg us to say nothing. Because they were creating, and they read well, write well, think well, we'll teach them what we're doing. Because you can't possibly do it. Now my suggestion is, Apple's going to need fewer and fewer of my gifted and talented kids, so what do I do with them? It used to be the world was, going to be kings and queens of the world and get highly compensated for it. What happens when those jobs get replaced? And really they have been. I really believe Silicon Valley is full of people who are employed at 6 figures who, if they were fired, nothing would happen. They've created more and more meetings and, Slack channels where they're doing things and having discussions. And if you got rid of all of that, they're really working about an hour a day.
I think our students feel that.
Yeah. Okay, a Dickens novel. Why is reading a novel just not another crazy, dumb hobby that people developed in the 19th century and it can go away? Does 2 things for you. It allows, The Good Work, the little bad short story I read as a kid, it allows you to speculate about a reality that would otherwise be unthinkable if you didn't, and how to wrestle with those moral options. And what is great about reading and vocabulary that isn't great about a film in the same way, though I love film and started a film program as hard as I could. It is this: words separate us from our emotions. Yeah. When I'm walking with hope on a beach, I don't describe walking with hope on a beach. Right. Because if I did, I'm not walking with hope on a beach, I'm talking about walking on hope with a beach. But sometimes it's good to talk about the date we're going to have. So Hope and I are going back and forth. Hope said, at some point this year, for our anniversary, I'd like to go to Lambeau Field. And I said, no, you don't want to go to Lambeau Field. You just think I want to go to Lambeau Field because I've never been. She said, no, you've made me watch so many Packer games now that it would be like going to Valhalla. We'll just go there. There will be uniforms. And I'm like, oh, can I marry you again? But notice, talking about it isn't doing it. And when you get to be our age, and if you've been married long enough, and they've lived through every story you have to tell, every joke they've heard, we don't have to talk anymore. I'll just say a thing, and she'll laugh. Like one word. That's from the Andy Griffith Show. If we talk about it. Words, vocabulary, the bigger it is, allow us to deal with adult problems with adult vocabulary without being emotional. If you can handle Pip, you can handle your grown-up finances without harming yourself. Pip will make all the mistakes for you. Great Expectations. But you can't do that, as far as I can tell, in any other human way without harming other people. You have to make people do things they shouldn't do. So you're not a poser. You're doing something very practical, the best you can. And what it means is, you'll notice that we have hired many of you, and you are a bit quirky and eccentric. Many of you could only work here. This is certainly true of me. We want to encourage you to be you, because that's the you-ness of you is the only thing of value that in the end we can be. Now notice our theology already taught us that. So Tim, why do you write poems?
Yeah, I'm about to ask a question that has to do with this. So,
Yeah, go ahead, ask it.
Well, so I think I often like to live in my head in a sort of John Henryism, because I find the John Henry story so inspiring. Right?
Yeah.
You fight the machine, right? You break your heart literally to prove that a man should work the railroad, not a machine.
But John Henry really lost, right? But he didn't. How did he not lose?
It's like a moral victory. He's in my mind, right? He lives in us. I don't know. But I worry about my John Henryism.
Yes.
I think because all of a sudden it's this story about like, no, I'll fight the machine that's taking my job, and I'll fight it to death.
So now John Henry would get drafted by the Packers, become a defensive lineman, and I would shower praise on him and wear his jersey.
Yeah.
What John Henry needed to realize is that we loved him. We loved his indomitable will. We loved it connected to his utterly beautiful physical form. And that we would venerate that, but he didn't need to build railroads anymore to do it. And letting go of what we're good at is hard. Right? If I'm the best railroad making man, then yeah, everybody roots for John Henry. But that's like rooting for the horse to beat the railroad.
Yeah,
They had those.
I'm tempted to do that.
That's right, and I'm inclined that way too, and you root for the horse. But look, man, the railroad's going to win in the end. It always wins. But that didn't mean horses disappeared. It meant that those who kept them could love them, right, Kate Gilbert? Not just use them. Go read Black Beauty and see how it worked out for horses when they were necessary. Now we can love horses. Did blacksmithing disappear with the onset of cars? No. Just fewer of them. But you blacksmith all you want. I still own, Dad owns, I think. Does Dad still own nails that our great-grandfather made?
I think so.
Yeah. But after a while, that wasn't a way to make money anymore, because the store could sell them more cheaply than you could make them. But it's still fun to make nails. So go on making them. You're just not going to get paid for it. And after all, you didn't really derive your value from money, did you? Do I derive the beauty of John Henry and his ability to swing and watching his muscles, watching him be a man, from the fact that I could get a railroad out of it? Or because he was, how does it end? How does the poem end? He broke his heart. I think it's something like, because he was a steel driving man. And for a steel-driving man, a man would die. But I don't care about the railroad. It works. People will pick something they don't like as well for ease and convenience. I didn't say you should do that. I don't like any of this. Everyone understand? Please do not shoot the messenger. Oh, John Mark hopes this happens. No, I wish we lived in a different time. You know when tech was cool? About the 90s. It worked so poorly you couldn't love it, but it was pretty useful. But we're not going back to Nokia flip phones, folks, unless you're Chris Yu. Now, look, the neo-Amish solution is one that we will all adopt in small ways. Do I think you should be sitting around like with your AI girlfriend? No, that's evil. Don't do that. Are students doing it? Yes. Because if you do a cost-benefit analysis on an AI girlfriend versus a regular girlfriend, plenty of guys are saying, this is better. Should they say that? That's your educational job. That's your job. And that's why you're right. We can't replace a Greek teacher like Al Geyer with an AI machine, because that way lies AI girlfriends. You can't have an AI mentor. You can have an AI trainer, but I hope what you're doing isn't training. Now, to the extent we use tools, here's what I want everyone to hear. Spell check is just AI, folks. A kind of AI. Writing prompts are kind of AI. And we have students who have disabilities that helping with their writing is going to be a very valuable tool to enable them to live good lives. So let's not become Luddites. Betting on Luddites is always a losing bet. Let's help our students know how to use these tools while remaining fully human, because you'll just use them slowly anyway. Right? I don't like fluorescent lights. So why do we have them? Is there one person in here who loves fluorescent lights? You love them. So why are they ubiquitous? They work, they function, they're easier, and I hate them. They're cheap. So soon it will be impossible for anything humans make to have superior quality in itself. So what should we teach our students to value?
What do you mean by that?
I mean this. I had relatives that were engineers whose part of their job were crafting parts for very high stress, like planes. And machines just do that better. And if you give a machine a pattern for a quilt, the materials for the quilt, 99% of us aren't going to be able to tell the difference. Now, if my granny made the quilt and you've made me human, I'll pick Granny's quilt. Now I'll make a claim that I don't want to defend, and it's unfair. But I have thought about it, and I'm trying to make it carefully. I don't think an AI production can have anything but derivative beauty. So I think if we educate our kids well, like I was having fun over the Christmas break, Whim Wham decided the Nutcracker, which she saw for the first time, she really loves it. But to her, it's Nut Boy. I went to see Nut Boy. Bring on Nut Boy. So Jane and I, my daughter, began to create the horrifying character Nut Boy using AI. Like Nut Boy leading an army of Nut Boys conquering the world. There are reasons for that. And that seemed like an amusing use of AI. But I think what was beautiful about the conversation was Jane and I having a good time. Now, Jane is also very artistic and has drawn for her mom a piece drawn from Jane Eyre. So verbal kind of music combination that's hanging in, I think, our bedroom right now. And is it better than if I put in a prompt to AI? Could AI somehow produce a painting that would be technically better than that painting? I assume so. But who would do that? if they were educated. This is where I really agree with you, right? Who would do that? If you heard that Jesus was in Palestine right now, you shouldn't watch him on TV. You should get on a plane and do what? Go sit under his teaching, because you're human. So if we educate the kind of students who'd say, wow, virtual Jesus, that's okay. Look, I love Hope. And anytime I'm not with Hope, I miss her a little. Imagine if I told you that, and I could walk over there, she's not there actually, and see Hope, but instead I choose not to because I can see her on a screen in my office. Seeing her on a screen in my office is a compensation for the better thing, which is seeing her face to face. Not because it's easier or better looking. We can all put filters on the picture on the phone. Do I want to love the 60-year-old woman I'm married to or a reasonable facsimile on a screen? That is classical Christian education. And that will never become obsolete. And that cannot be taught by a machine. Being a good friend cannot be taught by a machine. Because a machine cannot be your friend. It cannot. That is my crazy prediction for you. If you were, and then I'm done, no more questions. I want you to see how obvious this should be to you. If I was in a one-room schoolhouse in 1890, I promise you that some version of me would have said, I got bad news for all of you. If you're a John Henry, we've really needed you. And you are the top of our West Virginia social pyramid in many ways. If you were a man's man and could go move something or work a horse or ever try to make an ox move, we needed you. But we aren't going to need you anymore. The wimpiest, weakest person in this room is going to be able to move more weight easily than you could ever move with an ox and your muscles. So you better change, or you're going to be, come on, we all know, that if you're from West Virginia, I know the guy who, graduates from high school and still wearing the varsity leather jacket when he's my age almost, because that was the last time what he was good at was valued for money or social prestige. We got to help our kids who are smart now. Who escaped all that? I walked with my dad, same time I read this book. I'd have been about 10. Daniel and I were walking home from church, and my dad, somewhere in the late 70s, said, the world has changed. It's going to be okay for you, because you're smart, but you got to remember all the people who aren't good at school, because they've been left behind. And it isn't going to change. We're not suddenly going to create jobs for them. So you got to think of what to do. And I never forgot it. And what I'm saying to you out loud is a version of what my daddy said about a social class that doesn't mostly come to this school. Smart kids are obsolete if valued by work. More and more and more.